Mr. Brennan, Karen began, her voice tight with disapproval. She was holding a ruler, an actual wooden ruler. Karen, I replied, forcing a smile. Lovely day, isn't it? Lovely, she repeated, her eyes scanning my yard with an expression of undisguised horror. This jungle is hardly lovely, Mr. Brennan. It's unkempt. Unkempt? I asked, raising an eyebrow. I prefer to think of it as naturally landscaped, environmentally friendly, a haven for wildlife. It's overgrown, Mr. Brennan, Karen continued, ignoring my explanation. The grass is too long. The weeds are everywhere. It's attracting undesirables. Undesirables? I repeated, my voice laced with sarcasm. You mean butterflies, bees, the occasional ladybug? It's lowering property values, Mr. Brennan, she declared, her voice rising in pitch. It's an eyesore. It's a disgrace to Serenity Springs. An eyesore? I countered, gesturing towards my yard. I think it's beautiful. It's natural. It's alive. Unlike your yard, Karen, which looks like it's been sterilized with a flamethrower. Karen gasped, clutching her chest as if I'd physically assaulted her. My yard, she said, her voice trembling with indignation, is a model of proper landscaping. It's tasteful. It's under control. It's also devoid of any signs of life, I muttered under my breath. I'm going to have to report this, Mr. Brennan, Karen said, her voice firm. You're in clear violation of multiple HOA regulations. You'll be receiving a notice. She turned and marched back towards her house, her ruler held high like a weapon of mass destruction. The dreaded HOA notice arrived the next day, slipped under my door like a declaration of war. It was an official, typed letter on crisp white paper, embossed with the Serenity Springs HOA logo. A perfectly manicured lawn, naturally. Violation of community landscaping guidelines, I read aloud, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Excessive grass height, exceeding the maximum allowable 3 inches. Presence of unapproved plant species, that is, weeds. Failure to maintain a neat and orderly appearance. I crumpled the letter in my fist. Neat and orderly? It's a yard, not a surgical operating room. I was fined $100 for having a yard that was too natural. My initial reaction was outrage. This was ridiculous. It was petty. It was Karen. But beneath the anger, a flicker of amusement started to grow. This whole situation was so absurd, so over the top, that it was almost comical, almost. I loved my yard. I loved its wildness, its unruliness, its refusal to conform to the HOA's sterile vision of suburban perfection. It was my little patch of nature, my escape from the beige monotony of Serenity Springs. And I wasn't about to let Karen and her ridiculous rules take that away from me. I started researching HOA regulations, local ordinances, anything that might give me some leverage. I also started talking to my other neighbors, the ones who weren't named Karen. And I discovered something interesting. I wasn't alone. She's a nightmare, one neighbor, Mrs. Gable, whispered to me, her eyes darting nervously towards Karen's house. She measures everyone's grass. She reports every stray leaf. She even complained about my bird feeder. She's obsessed, another neighbor, Mr. Henderson, said, shaking his head. She thinks she's the queen of Serenity Springs, and she hates anything that doesn't fit her vision of perfection. It seemed Karen had a long and storied history of harassing her neighbors, of enforcing the HOA rules with an almost religious zeal, of making life miserable for anyone who dared to deviate from her narrow definition of acceptable. And that's when the montage began. It started subtly, Karen, armed with her trusty ruler, measuring my grass with the precision of a scientist conducting a crucial experiment. Karen, snapping photos of offending weeds with her phone, her expression a mixture of disgust and triumph. Karen, leaving anonymous notes on my door, filled with passive-aggressive complaints and thinly veiled threats. A friendly reminder, Mr. Brennan, that dandelions are not on the approved plant list. Then, it escalated. Karen calling the HOA office multiple times a day to report my violations. Karen sending emails to the entire neighborhood, filled with blurry photos of my yard and dire warnings about the impending collapse of property values. Karen even, I suspected, calling the city, complaining about, well, I wasn't entirely sure what she was complaining about, but it involved the words eyesore, nuisance, and possible health hazard. It was a campaign of harassment, a war of attrition, designed to break my spirit and force me into submission. But Karen didn't know who she was dealing with. She didn't know that beneath my easygoing exterior lay a stubborn streak a mile wide. And she definitely didn't know that I was about to turn her own rules against her in the most spectacular and gloriously overgrown way possible. The battle lines were drawn. The yard was the battlefield. And I, Miles Brennan, was ready for war. The HOA, spurred on by Karen's relentless complaining, was, predictably, escalating their efforts. I received another notice, this one informing me of an upcoming vote on a proposed amendment to the bylaws. The amendment, clearly targeting my yard, sought to tighten the restrictions on landscaping, specifically prohibiting excessively overgrown vegetation, unapproved plant species, and any landscaping that detracts from the overall aesthetic harmony of Serenity Springs. In short, they were trying to outlaw my entire yard. This wasn't just a skirmish anymore. It was a full-blown war. And I, Miles Brennan, was not about to surrender my right to a slightly wild, slightly overgrown, perfectly natural backyard. My internal monologue was a delightful mix of outrage, determination, and a growing sense of amusement at the sheer absurdity of it all. They want to ban unapproved plants, I muttered to myself, pacing my living room. They want to dictate exactly how my yard should look? Oh, they have no idea what's coming. I needed a plan, a strategy, a way to fight back, to defend my yard, to make Karen's perfectly coiffed hair stand on end. And to do that, I needed a loophole. A big one. My weapon of choice, as always, was the HOA bylaws, that dense, convoluted, and utterly soul-crushing document. I was also researching the local ordinances. I spent hours poring over the pages, searching for any clause, any ambiguity, any weakness I could exploit. I focused on the sections about landscaping, property use, and community standards. I read and reread every sentence, every footnote, every mind-numbingly boring paragraph, and then I found it. It wasn't a direct loophole, not exactly, but it was an opportunity, a glimmer of hope, a way to turn the tables on Karen and the HOA. The bylaws, in their infinite wisdom, had meticulously regulated residential property. They had rules about lawn height, plant types, fence styles, even the color of your mailbox. And this was the crucial part. They said nothing, not a single word, about public parks or community green spaces. And, as it turned out, the city of Serenity Springs, the actual city, not the HOA-controlled neighborhood, actively encouraged the creation of parks and green spaces. They even had a program that offered grants and assistance to residents who wanted to transform their properties into public amenities. A slow smile spread across my face. Public park, I muttered. Community green space. The seed of an idea, a gloriously ironic and wonderfully defiant idea, was starting to sprout. Operation Serenity Now was born, My plan was simple in its audacity. I wouldn't just fight the HOA's restrictions on my yard, I'd transform my yard. I'd turn it into something completely different. Something that Karen and her beige-loving cronies couldn't touch. I'd make it a public park. Yes, you read that right. A public park. Open to the entire community. Right there, on my formerly private property. The irony was almost too delicious to bear. Karen had complained that my yard was an eyesore, that it was unkempt, that it was lowering property values. Well, I'd show her an eyesore. I'd turn my eyesore into a designated public space, a community asset, a place where people could gather, relax, and enjoy the slightly overgrown beauty of nature. And the best part? Once my yard was officially a park, Karen's complaints about my personal landscaping choices would be completely irrelevant. The HOA's rules applied to residential properties, not to public spaces. I'd be free to let my grass grow a little longer, to plant whatever wildflowers I wanted, to create the natural, slightly chaotic oasis I'd always dreamed of. The name, of course, was crucial. It had to be something that would both attract visitors and subtly mock Karen's obsession with order and control. After much deliberation, and a few glasses of wine, I settled on it. Karen's Crater. It was perfect. It was a nod to a previous minor HOA conflict, involving a small, perfectly natural dip in my lawn that Karen had insisted was a sinkhole and a safety hazard. And it was a subtle, yet unmistakable dig at my nemesis. I could already picture Karen's reaction. The sputtering outrage, the vein throbbing in her forehead, the inevitable meltdown. It was a beautiful image. I knew it was ridiculous. I knew it was probably going to be a lot of work, but I didn't care. This wasn't just about a yard anymore. It was about principle. It was about freedom. It was about the right to, well, to have a slightly messy, wonderfully natural backyard, without the constant harassment of a power-hungry HOA busybody. My first step was to find someone to help me bring my vision to life. I needed a landscape architect, a park consultant, someone who wouldn't look at me like I'd completely lost my mind when I explained my plan. I found him online. His name was Alex. A good omen, I thought, recalling a previous HOA victory. And his company, Green Spaces Design, specialized in creating unique and sustainable outdoor environments. So, let me get this straight, Alex said, looking over my rather hastily drawn sketches of the proposed park. You want to turn your yard into a public park because your neighbor doesn't like your landscaping? Exactly, I said, nodding enthusiastically. Think natural. Think wildflower meadows. Think community gathering space. Think the exact opposite of everything the HOA stands for. Alex stared at me for a moment, then a slow grin spread across his face. You're serious? Dead serious, I said. I have a situation with my HOA, and this is my solution. I briefly recounted the saga of the grass height, the weeds, Karen's relentless complaining, and my burning desire for a little bit of park-based revenge. Mr. Miller, Alex said, shaking his head and chuckling, you are my kind of client. I'm in. This is going to be the most interesting project I've ever worked on. But are you sure about this? It's a bit unconventional. Unconventional is my specialty, I said. And besides, it's perfectly legal. The HOA can't touch me, or my park. And so, parkification began. The first step was, of course, the sign. A large, professionally made sign, prominently displayed at the entrance to my former yard. Karen's Crater, a Serenity Springs community park, open to the public. Then came the pathways, winding gravel paths that meandered through the slightly overgrown grass and wildflowers, leading to various attractions. We added benches, comfortable wooden benches, strategically placed to offer views of the, well, of the park. We installed picnic tables, perfect for family gatherings, community potlucks, or just a quiet lunch in the formerly forbidden zone of my backyard. And because I couldn't resist, I added a small playground. A swing set, a slide, a climbing structure, nothing too extravagant, but enough to keep the kids entertained, and to further infuriate Karen, who, I suspected, had a deep-seated aversion to children's laughter. We planted more wildflowers, a riot of color and texture designed to attract butterflies, bees, and other beneficial creatures. We even added a few native plant areas, showcasing the beauty of the local flora. And because I wanted to emphasize the community aspect of the park, I created a small community garden area where neighbors could grow their own vegetables and herbs. I also made sure to add wheelchair-accessible paths. And lastly, made a dog park section. The transformation was remarkable. My formerly ordinary suburban yard was becoming a haven, a refuge, a park. The neighbors, as expected, were intrigued. At first, they were surprised, confused, even a little skeptical. But as the park took shape, as the pathways were laid, as the benches were installed, as the wildflowers bloomed, their reactions shifted. They started to smile. They started to wave. They started to visit. They'd bring their kids to play on the swings. They'd sit on the benches, reading books or chatting with friends. They'd stroll along the pathways, admiring the flowers and the slightly overgrown greenery. It was like my yard had become a magnet, attracting all the people in Serenity Springs who secretly longed for a little bit of nature, a little bit of freedom, a little bit of escape from the HOA's relentless control. My internal monologue was a constant stream of triumphant pronouncements and giddy anticipation. "Take that, Karen," I'd mutter to myself as I watched a family enjoying a picnic on one of my newly installed picnic tables. "Enjoy your aesthetic harmony now." I imagined her face, contorted with rage, her perfectly manicured hands clutching her HOA rulebook. It was a beautiful thought. There was, of course, a brief visit from an HOA representative. Not Karen, thankfully. She was probably still recovering from the shock of seeing the public park sign. "Mr. Miller," he said, looking around my, now officially, public space, his voice a mixture of confusion and apprehension. "We've received some concerns about this development." "Concerns?" I repeated, feigning innocence. "What kind of concerns?" "Well," he said, stammering slightly, "it's rather unconventional and public." "It's a community park," I corrected, with a perfectly straight face. "Open to all residents of Serenity Springs. And, as you can see," I added, pulling out a copy of the local ordinances, which I now carried with me at all times, "it's perfectly compliant. Public parks are encouraged. In fact, the city even offers grants for this sort of thing." He looked at the ordinances, then at the park, then back at me. He clearly had no idea what to do. He mumbled something about reviewing the situation and retreated, looking utterly defeated. I, Miles Brennan, had once again outmaneuvered the HOA, and my park, my monument to backyard freedom and HOA defiance, was officially open for business. The anticipation was almost unbearable. The neighborhood was buzzing, and I, for one, couldn't wait to see Karen's reaction. The grand opening of Karen's Crater, I couldn't resist, was a moment I'll cherish forever. My former yard, now a fully fledged community park, was abuzz with activity. Neighbors strolled along the pathways, children shrieked with delight on the playground, dogs frolicked in the designated dog park area, and even a few adventurous squirrels explored the newly planted wildflower meadow. It was a scene of, well, of community, of joy, of everything Karen hated. And right on cue, Karen herself appeared. She didn't just arrive, she materialized, like a vengeful spirit summoned by the collective laughter of children. She stood at the edge of the park, my property, her face a mask of outrage, her perfectly pressed pantsuit practically vibrating with indignation. "What?" she bellowed, her voice echoing through the previously peaceful park. "Have you done?" I emerged from behind a group of children happily building a sandcastle, a picture of calm serenity, holding a watering can and wearing a t-shirt that read, "Parks and Recreation" and "HOA Retribution." "Good afternoon, Karen," I said, my voice smooth and even. "You're admiring my park, I presume?" "Park?" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at the scene of communal bliss. This is outrageous. You've turned your yard into a public nuisance." "It's a community park, Karen," I corrected, with a perfectly straight face. "Open to everyone, a place for neighbors to gather, to relax, to enjoy the slightly overgrown beauty of nature. And, as you can see," I added, gesturing towards the sign at the entrance, "it's perfectly legal. Private property, public access. A win-win." But, it's your yard," she stammered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You can't just turn it into a park." "Why not?" I asked, tilting my head. "It's my property, and I've decided to share it with the community. Besides," I added with a mischievous grin, "it's much more harmonious now, don't you think? No more eyesore of a lawn, just community spirit and wildflowers, lots and lots of wildflowers." I then proceeded to give her a tour, highlighting the park's various features, the winding pathways, the comfortable benches, the picnic tables, the playground, the community garden, even the dog park area, which, I pointed out, was equipped with biodegradable waste bags and a conveniently placed fire hydrant. Karen's reaction was predictable. She sputtered, she stammered, she shook her fist, she threatened. But mostly she just looked utterly defeated. The sheer absurdity of the situation, the blatant, yet technically legal circumvention of her precious HOA rules, had broken her. This is unacceptable," she finally managed to choke out, her voice hoarse. I'll have this park shut down. You'll see." She turned and stomped off, her sensible shoes leaving deep imprints in the now public grass, her aura of negativity practically wilting the nearby flowers. The emergency HOA meeting, Part 2, the park predicament, was, if possible, even more chaotic than the previous ones. Karen, looking like she'd subsisted solely on outrage and decaf coffee for the past few weeks, presented her case with the fervor of a lawyer. Of course, they tried changing the rules again. This park," she declared, her voice shaking with emotion, "is an affront to everything Serenity Springs stands for. It's a traffic hazard. It's a noise generator. It's attracting outsiders." She said outsiders, as if they were some kind of invading alien species. She'd even brought in a so-called expert, a guy who looked suspiciously like her nephew, wearing a suit that was clearly too big for him, who testified about the dangers of unsupervised public spaces and the potential for liability issues arising from people enjoying themselves in a park. Then it was my turn. "Miss Karen," I began, addressing the board with a calm, reasonable demeanor that was, of course, completely fake. "Seems to be under the impression that I've somehow violated the HOA bylaws. I assure you, before the new rules, I had not." I presented my defense, meticulously and methodically. I pointed out the HOA's new changes and pointed out how I was following them. I argued that the park was a benefit to the community, providing a gathering space, recreational opportunities, and a connection to nature. I presented evidence of community support, a petition signed by dozens of residents, testimonials from neighbors praising the park's beauty and its positive impact on their lives, and even a few thank you notes from children who loved the playground. And just for good measure, I'd brought along some park users to the meeting. A group of families, children happily clutching drawings of flowers and butterflies, and even a few dog owners with their well-behaved canine companions. The other board members were, to put it mildly, divided. Some were clearly still loyal to Karen, but their support was rapidly disintegrating. Others looked confused, overwhelmed by the sheer absurdity of the situation. And a few, I suspected, were secretly enjoying the spectacle, and perhaps even planning their next visit to the park. Then, a man from the back of the room stood up. He was a representative from the city's Parks and Recreation Department, and he'd come at my invitation. "I've visited Mr. Miller's park," he said, his voice clear and strong. "And I have to say, I'm impressed. It's a well-designed, well-maintained space that provides a valuable service to the community. In fact," he added with a smile, "we'd be happy to offer Mr. Miller our official endorsement and even some assistance in expanding the park's amenities." That was the final blow. The board, facing a potential lawsuit, a public relations nightmare, and the undeniable evidence of the park's positive impact, and the enthusiastic support of the city, voted to do nothing. The meeting ended in chaos, with Karen screaming about the downfall of property values and the rise of the wildflower menace. And me, Miles Brennan, the accidental park creator, walking out with a smug, but well-deserved, I thought, smile on my face. But Karen, like a particularly persistent and well-fertilized weed, wasn't about to give up. What followed was a period of escalating absurdity that I can only describe as the park war. Karen, obsessed with shutting down my park, or at the very least making my life miserable, tried every tactic she could think of. She filed complaints with the city, claiming the park was a zoning violation, a safety hazard, and a public nuisance. The city inspectors came, they inspected, and they found nothing. My park was perfectly legal. She tried to get the park designated as a nuisance, citing noise complaints, traffic congestion, and even, I kid you not, excessive happiness. The attempt failed miserably. Most people either politely declined to sign her petition or laughed in her face. Some even joined my newly formed Friends of Serenity Springs Park group, dedicated to protecting and enhancing the park. She even, I suspect, attempted some minor acts of sabotage. I found a few, easily removed, keep off the grass signs stuck in the now public lawn. And one morning, I woke up to find the park's entrance mysteriously blocked by a pile of beige gravel. Apparently, she was hoping to discourage visitors. It didn't work. Of course, I had security cameras everywhere, capturing her every move. And I, of course, responded in kind. Not with vandalism, oh no. I was above that. I responded with enhancements. I organized community events in the park. We had picnics, concerts, outdoor movie nights, using a portable projector and a sheet strung between two trees, and even a wildflower festival, celebrating the beauty of the slightly overgrown landscape. I started a Friends of Serenity Springs Park group, attracting dozens of volunteers who helped with park maintenance, organized events, and generally spread the word about our little community oasis. I added more features to the park: a bird bath, a lending library, a small, weatherproof box filled with books, a fairy garden, a whimsical collection of miniature houses and figurines hidden among the wildflowers, and even a small donation box, with proceeds going to park maintenance and local charities. And, because why not, I partnered with local businesses. A nearby coffee shop started offering park picnic baskets, filled with sandwiches, salads, and drinks. A local ice cream truck made regular stops at the park. Even a yoga instructor started offering outdoor classes on the formerly grassy expanse of my backyard. It was a glorious, ridiculous, utterly over-the-top spectacle. I even started charging a small admission, with the proceeds going to a local charity. And with each passing day, with each new event, with each new act of defiance, I could feel Karen's frustration growing, her power waning, her sanity slipping. The park had become more than just a yard. It was a symbol of resistance, a testament to the power of creative and slightly unhinged community building. And I, Miles Brennan, the accidental park ranger, was winning.